As a little Indian kid growing up in the 90s, my classmates would always ask me questions like, "Where's your magic carpet at, Aladdin? Did you pray to your cow this morning?" And the all-time favorite was, "How's a Quickie Mart doing, Apu?" And it was hard hearing this because I felt like so much of it was true. My mother did make us take our shoes off so we'd respect the carpets. We didn't eat beef, and my parents did own a gas station. I even loved working there, but after I heard my classmates speak about it, I felt badly about my life in general. And I couldn't tell anybody because my teachers didn't care, and I couldn't speak to my parents about it because even the person I was closest to, my grandfather, just didn't seem like the person who would sympathize. Like this one instance, he was chopping some goat meat, and he just chopped off a piece of his thumb. And the only thing he did was he held his hand up and he said, "Shh, don't tell your mother." So, you know, he seems like a tough guy, but he did have a sweet side to him, too, which is like he liked to tell me these bedtime stories. And his favorite one was about this guy, Baba Deep Singh, a great Sikh warrior who was in this battle against an invading army, and he gets into a clearing, and he draws up his sword to fight the enemy's general, and they both swing at one another, and he gets his head chopped off. Now, I found this disturbing today, but I found it particularly disturbing as a 5-year-old. But I was also Indian, as I've said, so I'd never heard American bedtime stories and never made the connection that they were supposed to lull you off to sleep rather than keeping you up in a panic. My grandfather would sense this and he'd grab my hand and he'd be like, "Don't worry, grandson, he did not die." Because Baba Deep Singh rose to his feet, picked up his head, put it in the palm of his hand, and continued to fight so that he could die as a Sikh, whole, more or less, at the Golden Temple. So yeah, I just kind of had to live with the bullying. But this one day I came up with this idea while working at my parents' gas station, which was, I just emptied out my book bag, I filled it up, and then the next morning when the bell rang for recess, I opened up Nick's Mobile Mini Quickie Mart. And everything changed from then, because my bullies were no longer calling out insults, they were putting out requests for Butterfingers, Snickers, and Mexican Lucas, and they weren't trying to take my lunch money, they were just giving me theirs. And so I'd embraced my stereotypes to my benefit. But that seemed to shift after September 11th. Now they were saying, "Why do your people hate this country so much? Why don't you go back to Islam and fuck you, terrorist?" So the world had become a brittle and breakable place. And the neighbors and friends who a day earlier had said that they loved the inflection of our language now saw the same sounds fall from our mouths like grenades. The words were transgression enough. "In America, you speak American." What did you just say to him? Nothing. I didn't want to say anything in Punjabi to anyone, especially not my grandfather. So I left his language out to evaporate from my tongue's memory. I said I didn't like the way the tonal inflections made me bow my head. I cut the gara, a steel bracelet that all Sikhs wear. I said it felt useless and bulky around my hand. And then I shaved my beard, and I made sure that I kept my hair short because I liked the feeling of my face being bare. But I realized that looks were not everything, and as a brown guy, I still needed to lighten up. So I picked up a sense of humor. And this one Halloween, when the war was still raging and the hunt for Osama bin Laden was still going strong, I did what anybody would do, right? I took a turban and I dressed up like Osama bin fucking Laden. And when I got to the Halloween party, I was throwing baby powder anthrax at everybody saying, "Death to America." And they loved it. They loved it so much that I even got all the virgins I was promised for my martyrdom. Because a sexy doctor, a Pikachu, and a slutty carrot stood next to me for photos. I finally felt like I had a group of friends I could fit in and be myself. And then a few years after graduation, I decided I didn't want to work with my parents anymore. I had always been hustling for money, but I wanted to chase something else. I wanted a career that followed my passions, something that spoke to my heart, which was making death metal music. And so one day after this photo shoot, a good friend of mine and the lead singer of Suicide Silence, Mitch Lucker, said on the phone, yeah, we're recording the album with Nick Bygone. And I asked him, "Hey man, why'd you say that? My name is Nick Randhawa." And he said, "Well, that's really hard to pronounce. Besides, everybody knows you because your company Bygone." And I was like, well, I guess that makes sense, you know? But I had never thought of that because growing up, everybody in my neighborhood knew me because of my family. So that identity followed me everywhere. But now that I was away from my family, I was being known for my actions, my passions, and my personality. And I thought I was becoming my own man. And in that moment, I felt like I had my own name. Half a decade later, I'm chasing an ambulance that's carrying the man who gave me my first name. And when I arrive at the hospital, the doctors say that your grandfather's lost 95% of his lung capacity. For him to survive, we're going to have to switch him to a different machine, and that means we're going to have to shave his beard. And so I tell him, Bapuji, they need to shave your beard. And he shakes his head no. And I think maybe he doesn't understand because my Punjabi is broken from years of neglect, so I say it again, Bapuji, they need to shave your beard so that you could breathe. But he shakes his head again, no. And at this point, I'm getting a little frightened, and I say, Bapuji, if you don't shave your beard, you're going to die. And he sits up a little bit and just looks at me and says, then let me die, grandson. And I hear my grandmother shout from the back, don't leave me all alone. And he says for her to be strong. And sensing the fear inside of me, like all those years before, he grabs my hand and he says to take me home. I promise that I will, but I know he'll never leave that room. And so we made 4 walls of flesh and blood around him, and I watch quietly as he goes. I see him embrace his death, willing to carry his head in his palms if he has to, so that he can die as a Sikh. But not me. I had tried to wash the shades of my skin, the content of my culture, and the tone of my tongue just for a few privileges, so that I could fit in, so I could feel American, so I could get that sense of pride when somebody would say that you look like you're mixed with a bit of white, but I'll never be white. And now I'm not so sure I'll ever know how to be Indian either. It was 3 years after that day that I finally took back my birth name. It was another year before I had the courage to grow out a full beard, and another 6 months before I wore a turban for the second time. But this time as a mark of my culture and not as a costume. I wore it for a full year before I felt like I could take it off. And in that time I learned to know my grandfather, and I got many looks, many questions, and many more insults, many more than I got when I was a child. But I learned to push back against the pressure. And even though I don't think I'll ever be as tough as my grandfather, I do feel closer to him every day. Thank you.
It's the Rock in the building.